Good afternoon, and thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Marlo Robinson, and I am one of two commissioners, DEI commissioners from CSPEN, who will be speaking to you today. We also have Tanya Mason from Concord Career Colleges, and she's the Vice President of HR. She'll be joining us as well, as she is a co-chair for Concord's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Steering Committee. So joining me, as I've shared, is Laura Plummer. She is a commissioner with CSPEN's DEI initiative. And we also have the founder who is listening of this commission, and her name is Jerry Prochaska. The commissioners who are not here today, but who have contributed significantly, are Todd Jacob, Eric Langness, Julie Maselli, and Jane Parker. Also, I'd like to mention Dustin Hopper. So I want to take you back to the start of this viral pandemic, because it introduced a number of medical terms, and I'm a nurse, so I'm going to come to you from that perspective. These terms were new to the public. Some of those terms included messenger RNA, monoclonal antibody therapy, and PPE, just to name a few. So then, with the viral pandemic serving as a backdrop, the murder of George Floyd played out on every major communication outlet for the world to view on May 25th, 2020, and known terms re-emerged. Some of those terms include diversity, equity, and inclusion, Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter. By the way, my life matters, and so does yours. And DEI allies. To be an ally, what does it mean? How does that fit into your lifestyle and your role? And so now I have a reimagined term for your consideration, and that's PPT, which stands for Pivot Plot Twist. You may be wondering what I mean by that. Well, here are two examples. At the start of Q1 2020, most of us were going about our ADLs, which are activities of daily living, without much thought of how our world would change if we encountered a deadly viral agent. Then, with little to no forewarning, the second week of March began the ushering in of a next normal, a new way of life for all of us. This next normal impacted our industry and resulted in online classes at institutions that may have only been in discussion stages of such plans. Disruptive innovation will accelerate discussion into action, won't it? So, in other words, our pivot to online learning was the response to the COVID plot twist. A few short months later, we witnessed a Black man's death as he lay face down crying out for his mother. For a full 9 minutes and 29 seconds, students, employees, leaders, community members, people watched in horror and realization that this pandemic almost passed us by without notice, but because the viral pandemic had us glued to our personal devices, we saw the coverage, and for many, it was the first time the truth of this pandemic became a reality. Though there have been hundreds of such incidents that many knew all about all too well, when we all saw it collectively worldwide, it provided the opportunity for us to lean in and pivot due to the pandemic of incivility and injustice, which of course is the plot twist. Because the lines between role and real are not black and white, personal life events inform professional work behavior for your employees and your students. On June 9th, 2020, Jerry issued an invitation via email to any interested party, which read in part like this: we must do something to initiate the conversation on socioeconomic and social issues and how these issues affect your students and institution's future. For those of us who answered the call, Jerry shared that she wasn't sure what we needed to do, but she knew we needed to do something. We all agreed with her, and so our honest discussions and our hard work began. Those of us who answered her call to action are now titled CSPEN's DEI commissioners, and as such, we are issuing a call to action to each of you. There seems to be a prevailing belief among us commissioners that one may or may not agree with one another's policies, policing, or politics, and that's okay. We can and should show intentional respect for another human being with whom we share time, space, and opportunity. It is in this spirit that we ask you to join us as an ally in this work. DEI matters in higher education, and we encourage you to do your own pivot by leaning and learning more about how your institution can earn certification in DEI matters, and then actually take the steps to become certified. We will equip you with a pathway and tools to assist you in defining and customizing what's showing up and leaning into DEI educational matters looks like at your institution. So again, I want to thank you so much for being here. I want to share that at the end of our conversation with the panelists and a short Q&A after that, we're going to unmute you and ask you to please speak if you have questions, because we want to hear from you. We want to learn from you as well. So with that having been said, Laura, I'm going to ask you, if you would, to just kind of give a bit of an overview on how we came together and then the different steps involved in certification and Certification Plus.
The panel started having conversations about different ideas and circumstances in the different regions around the country. We are all from different walks of life. We are all from different parts of this country. We are all from different schools. So with all of our differing backgrounds, we were able to start a list. That list grew, and it grew quite large. So we decided to take certification and make it certification and Certification Plus. Certification is the baseline model that we created for people to be able to be a small school or a large school, or someone who's never even heard of DEI, and start to take action to create an awareness at each school. We try to make it affordable. So every time we would think of an idea, we would say, how can this affect a small school? How can this affect a large school? How can this affect a school with not many people to work on the staff? So we took all of that into consideration. So the certification level is something we believe any size school could achieve. And then the Certification Plus is taking all of that certification and making it be even more advanced in the awareness with staff and faculty and students for DEI, and the recognition that everybody is different and we all come from different walks of life.
All right. So I am going to ask you for your why statement. You know, we've all shared in various arenas and venues kind of why this work at this time for us. And so I'm going to ask you, Laura, to please share your why statement. Tanya, I'll ask you the same. Why this work? Why now?
This is a very emotional topic because of what happened on May 25th of 2020. I need to remember that I am raising children in a world that needs to recognize that there is diverse cultures. There are different ways of thinking and believing, and everybody needs to have a safe space to be who they are. And I would hate to think that at some point, either one of my children would become a victim because of who they might be or what they might believe. So when I think of DEI, I think of everybody. Whatever you look like, whatever you believe, you are part of the whole makeup of this country. And I would like to think that we could come up with a way to make that a way for all of us to educate in a realm where different is acceptable and different is normal in the new way of thinking and educating. As the controller for an educational institution, I would like to believe that we can create an environment where students can come and learn and not feel threatened when they are in the learning space, that they don't have to always be watching behind their back, worrying about what's going to happen to them while they are in their learning mode, focusing on their studies instead of focusing on what might happen to them when they try to get to school or try to go home from school. So my why is twofold. One is personal, about the life that I want my children to be able to live, and the other is the life and the environment that I want to create for the students that come to our school.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Laura. Tanya?
Yeah, so my why is twofold probably as well, but as I think back to the events of last year and how it affected, people that I know personally, and the things that were happening even within the city that I live in, it just broke my heart to have to live through some of the things that we all went through. I agree with Laura. I want my children to grow up feeling safe and secure. And as the mother of a child that has special needs, autism, her inclusion into society has been challenging at many times. So I can look at it from that perspective. So my why is, I love the statement that, every person is going through something personally that you know nothing about, right? And so part of this initiative for me is to raise awareness and help people to just be more kind to each other and more accepting to each other. And so those are really my whys, because I really think that we can, as a team, create a much better environment for everyone involved if we just have that compassion and caring for everybody that's around us.
Thank you so much for sharing, Tanya. And so I'll share that my why is multifaceted as well, just as we are as human beings. It's no different in this important work. I think as a Black woman about my own journey and the fact that I was raised by a really strong woman, a single mother, that raised me to be confident and self-assured and assisted me on my educational journey to become a nurse and then to become a lawyer. I think about my husband of 30 years who has been so supportive of me as a woman who started her own business 20 plus years ago, and he was an ally in that sense, and saying, yes, as a woman, you can do this and go out and be great and do it if this is your heart's desire. I think about the 5 children that he and I have together and the journey that they're on, which is so different in so many ways from my very own, and so similar in so many ways to my very own. I think about my grandmother who worked and put food on the table, cleaning law offices. And she did it, and she did it with pride, and she did it well. But she never had an idea, nor did I, when I would go to those offices and help her clean, that one day I'd be a lawyer working in an office just like that. I think about all of that in this work. And so much of just my husband's journey as a Black man and being stopped by the police and thinking one night, I may not go home to my wife. He describes a situation where he was so close to what he felt was going to be mortal harm to his body that he wasn't sure, he said, for a while, that he would be coming home to his family. I think about that. I think about the 2 young Black men that I'm raising, my sons, 19 and 14, and what their lives may look like, or my daughters. And all of that culminated for me with the death of George Floyd. All of that just came to kind of a collision course for me. And so I think I want change and I want to be a part of that positive change. And so my why really was born out of how. If I want change, how can I be a part of what I want to see? I just heard on a separate DEI webinar just last night, I actually saw that when describing diversity inclusion, there is a quote, and it certainly is not mine, but that diversity is akin to being invited to the party, and inclusion is akin to being asked to dance at the party. And how do I be a part of that process? And how do I make a difference for my own children? And then, as a National Dean of Nursing at Concord, how do I make a difference for all of my students and my faculty and everyone that I share this journey with? How do I be a positive part of that? As Tanya said, how do I show kindness intentionally with all of the lives that we come into contact with day in and day out? So all of that is a really long, like going around my elbow to get to my thumb answer to my why is born out of how, and my how is how do I make life better for myself and everyone that I am honored to touch on this journey. So thank you for allowing me to share that. We'll move on to certification now, and I'm going to ask Laura to walk us through certification. There are really, when we talk certification, 2 different journeys, 2 different pathways One is certification, which is a more basic pathway to achieve DEI in higher education status. It gives not just specific information, but it gives sections. I have referred to them as domains of what you would want to fulfill. And so we're going to give you ideas and suggestions, but we're also going to encourage you to think, and perhaps a starting place would be to start a committee if you don't yet have a DEI committee at your higher ed institution, and give some thought to how you can fulfill these different categories. And there are 6 that Laura will take you through. And then if you really want to bump it up, maybe you've already started your DEI journey and you're a really good part way in it. Maybe you would strive to become certification plus versus certification pathway certified. So we'll go through both of those and show you more of what that looks like. Laura?
So certification is the basic model that the panel put together. We started with a long list of a whole lot of everything, and then we went through and we divided the certification and the certification plus into 2 different lists of bullet points. For the certification, it's more the basic concepts like check your calendar and see what type of holidays you're celebrating. Are you all inclusive, or do your holidays seem to lean more towards one specific direction, maybe more towards Christian or more towards traditional American holidays? So that's one place that in the base certification we can get started. Another area that you could get started, as Marlo said, was assign a person. Here at Western Tech, I have approached our student services person to ask the possibility that maybe it could be added to her plate, since she's involved with the students every day, helping them with everything. Maybe she's the right person for us to have on staff already existing, so we don't have to add a position. And that's the whole idea behind the certification. The basic is we'd like you to be able to achieve these things without having to add a whole lot to your bottom line. Just maybe diversify the individual or group of individuals that could start the recognition of various different diversity topics. There is a long list. Jerry can send the list to you. Anybody who would like that, they certainly may reach out to her or any one of us, and we can send that list to you. But what we are going to do for this particular session is we are going to focus on the main factors that are involved in both the certification and the certification plus, and that is the levels that we need to recognize for our students, existing and new, for our staff and faculty, and then what steps we can help you take in order to move forward in starting the whole process with certification. So the first slide that we're going to share with you is to focus on your incoming students. Remember at orientation that start making declaration that you are a higher education institution that recognizes diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our acronym being DEI. Explain to the students what that is. Spend more than 5 minutes on that topic so that they start to have an understanding of why this is important. If you achieve certification with the CSPEN panel review, there will be a way for you to post that recognition so that you can claim to be recognized by CSPEN for DEI. That you do recognize that everybody matters and that there is inclusion at your school. With your new students, make sure that you continue the dialogue so that they remember all the way through their education that this is part of the culture of your school. And then bring awareness to your new students, and all of your students by engaging in different activities. And that's where, for our situation, I'm considering maybe our student services person being that link to DEI awareness, because she already is so engaged with our students that this may be a good space for her. She has popcorn days. She could also have culture days. She could have DEI awareness days. So for the incoming students, those are the things that I would like to bring to the table for you guys to think about. Marlo, I don't know if there's anything else that you or Tanya would like to add to this particular topic.
I think that that's great. It's just a starting point, right? And so we really want to make sure that we're just sparking idea and conversation, but we also want schools and institutional um, educational institutions to make this their own. So thank you.
So the next slide is focus on your existing students. When the panel was putting together the certification list and the certification plus list, we were focusing on, okay, well, we could cover this at orientation, but then the question was, well, what do you do with the students that are already here at your school? How do you get them included until you have reached them all? So we are recommending that you incorporate DEI conversations into your curriculum, that it be part of, you know, I know here in Texas, we do Constitution Day, and we have very specific conversations about the US Constitution and the meanings behind why the Constitution exists and why it's so important to our country. So same concept, do with your existing students similar conversations, similar curriculum, similar projects, so that they start to be aware of what DEI is. And then the existing students and the new students will all start to come from the same place and the same understanding about what the school expects and what the students expect from the school. Offer to follow up with students that have other questions. You may have instructors that really don't know how to address this issue. So help the instructors be able to answer the students' questions by making them aware as well. Marla, is there anything you'd like to add on this one?
Yeah, I really would just encourage attendees to consider what your externships and your clinical sites may be looking for, how whatever you put into place can benefit them as stakeholders and future employers. Consider that as a part of your, we used to call them soft skills, right? But they're so important, they're now called essential skills. So how do we make this type of DEI education in the curriculum that's being delivered, both in theory and in clinical and externship, part of those essential skills?
That's a very good point. We hear it all the time from our employers. What do you need most from our students? We need them to understand that the world outside is different and they need to know how to behave in social settings, because that is going to work as a social setting.
That's right, right. It's part of that emotional intelligence, right? And just building that skill.
Yes. So the next slide, we were talking about, it's hard to demonstrate to students that we are a DEI school if we don't educate our staff and faculty. And I'm sure everybody on this webinar has those lovely annual trainings that you have to go through in topics that are mandatory. It's not necessarily that DEI is mandatory, but I would hope that we could approach this as DEI is exciting and embraced. And if we embrace the concept for our students, then we too need to understand what it is that we are telling our students they need to believe by making sure our staff and our faculty are educated as well. And then maybe the instructors that don't have answers to the students' questions will become more educated, because they will become more and more exposed to the diversity, equity, and inclusion concept. Maybe there are certain things that you could do with your staff and faculty, just like we do the students. If you're going to have a culture day, include your faculty. Maybe an instructor has one day in the classroom where everybody comes prepared to talk about their particular culture, or maybe they bring in food from their particular culture or their ancestry. So there's lots of different things, but in order for you to have the students educated, then the staff and faculty need to also be aware of what the belief is of the school if they are going to stand on the DEI CSPEN certification, and how do they educate their students in the classroom. Marlo, anything to add?
I don't. I'm going to ask Tanya to kind of share towards the end of this all that we have done, not all, but a lot of what we have done at Concord, because it addresses so many of these subsections. So that's
okay.
Thank you.
So This one I found most interesting as we were going through our learning curve. The panel learned a lot. We learned from each other. We learned from the guidance that we had from the attorneys that were helping us with this concept. We want you to think about conflict resolution in a different way. We're basically flipping on its head, kind of like you flip the classroom around. When there is a disciplinary violation at your school, evaluate whether or not it was a disciplinary problem because of misunderstanding, or was it truly disciplinary problems? For example, maybe there is a person who comes from a culture where a certain behavior is normal. Rather than react in a punitive manner with that student, find out from that student why that action happened so that we know, is this a behavior thing that we need to re-educate, saying, look, that where you came from, that may be normal, but in a general population, in a social environment, those behaviors are not acceptable. Let's help you to relearn those behaviors so you change the normal habits. Anything that you'd like to add on this one?
Yeah, there is. Thank you, Laura. So bias intervention, I just want to spend a little bit of time on bias because I want to just share we all have them. And that's normal. It's how we're made as human beings, right? And so part of that bias intervention may include some bias training for faculty and staff so that they better understand that we have biases, both those that we acknowledge and those we may not be aware of, intentional and unintentional biases, what that looks like, how it could show up for each of us, and then how we handle that, right? So just non-judgmental, very supportive, but educational. This is what it is, and these are some things that you can do because it exists. Thanks, Laura.
You bet. Safe spaces. This was very important to several members of our panel. So we started doing some research into safe spaces. Jerry actually brought in someone to talk about safe spaces at the CSPEN conference, and then she also had that safe space conversation again in a webinar. There's some tremendous information out there on how to create safe spaces for your students and possibly for your staff and faculty. You need to identify either electronically or physically a quiet place. I heard someone the other day who has a child with special needs say that at their school they have a cooling off room. And that's where this particular student is able to go when they need basically to put themselves in timeout so that they can regroup and they can refocus and get themselves back to centered where they know they need to be. So there may be bullying going on at your school, even though we're in a space where it is adults. It doesn't mean that there's not some people who might be bullied. Give them a safe place to go in order to report to somebody that there might be bullying going on. Bullying could happen physically, it could happen in the electronic space as we all go to online education. So be aware of these things, that your students have a place where they can go and either report that there's a problem without having to create an issue, and maybe a place physically where they can go and find a quiet space to get themselves back under their normal place of comfort. Make sure that you find resources that can help you with this. I know Jerry supplied one for all of us that attended the webinar. It was a great resource for how to create safe spaces, but there may be some locally that you can find as well. And also, check your community. I know where our school is located, you see signs saying this is a safe space. If your desire is to become a physical safe space school for your community, then check with the authorities in your area to find out how to do that.
Yeah, I readily recall when we were really fleshing this specific category out that you actually named it, Laura. And yes, and that we really were intentional in not just creating physically safe spaces, though we know based on Maslow's that's important, right? You can't learn if you don't know where the bathroom is, or if you don't feel like you can let your guard down in the classroom. So it was really intentionally creating both the physical safe space, but also the emotional safe space. And so there was a lot of discussion about what does that look like. And some of the ideas were, there were physical rooms where people could just decompose and relax and breathe. And that may have been some aromatherapy and lighting and colors. Color therapy came up in topics of discussion. But then how do you recreate that in the online platform? And so being really thoughtful about what that looks like, whether it's having a really good staff member, a faculty member who is able to facilitate that, or specific times. And so there are so many ideas. And as Laura alluded to, certainly Jerry is a great resource for that. Let me just make a correction, especially because we're being taped. We don't want anyone to decompose. We want them to decompress. So a place where they can decompress is really important, right? And do what we're doing, have a little bit of a chuckle, because laughter is good medicine for the soul. So thanks, Laura.
Something's starting to stink in here. Okay, we're going to go on to the next slide. Accountability and monitoring compliance. So we have put together a panel as part of this whole year and a half long process. We have determined that a certification would last for 3 years, and a certification plus would last for 5 years. We thought that if you have taken the steps to do everything it takes to be certification plus, you are a school serious about what it is that we are all about for the DEI certification. So if it's just a regular certification, that's more of the baseline. Every 3 years, it would be a renewal. And for the certification plus, it would be an every 5-year evaluation for a renewal. You must be current on your certification dues and comply with designated certification levels. You must identify specific contacts assigned for overseeing the compliance and the activities of your school. And we will actually be in touch with you as a panel to help you develop everything that you're doing. If you have any questions, that is what we're here for. If we don't know, we will find a source that can help you with that. If you don't know how to go about starting, we are here to help you with that as well.
Absolutely. And because our commissioners are all across the United States, certainly if there are regional questions and resources that we can assist with in helping to inform your process, we're willing to partner with you and do just that. So we are all over the place, and we're happy to help in that respect. I do want to also share that there is a small, it's very minimal fee, and it is $150 if your program per location is 500 or less, is less than 500 students, $150 per location. If you have 500 or more per location, it's $250. So it really is a nominal fee for the certification plus, and that brings with it not just the pathways that are fleshed out, but a partner, a commissioner who will assist on your journey, and then who will review once you have all of the information ready to be reviewed, who will then do those reviews. So we'll stop here now, and I don't think we have anything further to share on certification plus. So we're going to move to Q&A. And just before I do that, Tanya, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you just to share some things that we have done, and just to give a bit of context that Concord really began. We began a year ago, so we're still pretty new in our journey of DEI, a concerted effort with a formal organization. I know that many of us have done this work for a lifetime, but as a concerted effort, it's a pretty new initiative for us, but it is sustainable and we are serious about it. And Tanya's a co-chair of our DEI steering committee. And so I'll just ask her to speak on some of the things that we achieved last year and a little bit about where we plan to go for next year. Tanya?
Absolutely. So last year, in the fall, we actually formed co-chairs, which is Marlo and myself and one other person, Nancy Jones, and we actually formed a steering committee that's made up of a cross-functional team, and we actually meet once a week. So we do meet every week to talk about what's going on, what are our next steps, and things like that. We actually held listening sessions with both associates and students last year to get a pulse of how the organization was feeling about diversity and inclusion. And from there, we actually decided on 3 focus areas at that time, and that's education and onboarding, events, and basically taking a look at our recruitment efforts. So we actually formed subcommittees out of that, and those subcommittees meet typically about every couple weeks to talk about what's going on in their particular area. We did host a cultural week at all the campuses, and that was similar to what Laura was talking about, but it was right in the middle of everybody was still at home, and we had people post things about their culture, recipes, all kinds of different stuff. It was a lot of fun. We created an actual SharePoint page that is D&I focused. And we also set up a D&I email so that people could email questions or comments or suggestions. We created associate email badges that they could put on their email signature, such as Hispanic Heritage Month, Black History Month, the Asian American Pacific Islander Month. And those are just to name a few. So we've done that pretty consistently. We did bias training with our Concord associates. We had a series of videos that they watched. We also brought in an outside law firm that also did some additional training with all our associates and leaders. We now have at every campus and at the CSC a D&I stopping station where we can post information about what's going on. And then we've just recently implemented D&I coordinators at every campus. So there's an actual dedicated person at every campus. I did want to bring up one of the things, we did add Juneteenth as a Concord holiday, but one of the things that we did during the June month for Juneteenth and Pride month, we actually did trivia, and we did it for 2 weeks. And it was a huge learning experience for everybody, but people also had fun with it because we got to draw prizes and all that kind of good stuff. And we got a lot of good feedback from our associates that, oh my gosh, I didn't know that stuff. This was awesome. It was such a great learning experience. So those are some of the things that we did. And then we're actually in the process this week of doing town halls with our associates and our students. So they've been going very well so far.
Indeed, they have. Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate that. I think it just gives so many ideas for those colleagues of ours who may be, like I said, just starting their journey, or maybe they're in their journey and they're looking for some new, fresh ideas. So there you are. Thank you for that. When we were at the live conference in Chicago, we also spoke about a floating holiday. And so I just want to share, because we've done that as well at Concord, where we have a floating holiday that allows associates to use that one day to celebrate their culture, someone else's, learn more about someone else's culture. There are no questions asked. They use that one day, that holiday, as they see fit. And I have heard so many associates are so appreciative of the ability to do that. So I wanted to share that. So now we're going to move to just a few questions that I have for this esteemed panel, and then I'm going to move to any questions that our attendees may have, and I will unmute you at that time, attendees. I'd love to hear, we spoke about our own personal lives. I'd love to hear from both of you why it's important for institutions to acknowledge DEI matters. Why do institutions really need to take this seriously?
I think it's important because we spend most of our days with the people that we work with, and we spend most of our days focused on work. And I think that it's really important to have your value system around DEI, not only at work, but at home, because they should carry over together. So I think it's really important for institutions to do that, to help set the stage for that awareness that we were talking about earlier.
I think for institutions, you're dealing with cultures from all over this country and possibly from all over the world. And the more we recognize that even someone that is just 5 states away from you was raised in a totally different environment than maybe what you were raised in. And we're all coming together in this one big melting pot called school. So the institutions that become more aware of the differences and how to include those differences as part of their culture, become a more welcoming environment for learning. And perhaps in the long run, it also ends up being something that more and more people around the country become aware of, that this is a school that believes that inclusion is important, and they will feel welcome to go to your school because it is a safe learning environment and the culture there is one that is accepting and willing to learn about different cultures rather than stagnant in the culture of just where the institution is. I know for us, we have a very, very large military population, both at our school and in our city. And they definitely come from all over the world. So it would behoove us to be more aware of the cultures that are coming to our school by educating ourselves on the basics and then growing from there to the certification plus.
Fabulous. So I have a follow-up question, and that is there a financial impact related to DEI, either not incorporating it, can that affect a financial um, line item? And I guess I mean, to be clear, so DEI is important in higher education. We've established that. Could there be financial consequences if you don't include DEI initiatives as a part of your company's plan, overall plan? Could there be financial impact for students? Could you lose students perhaps if you aren't intentionally inclusive? How about employees? Does that impact financially or in any way a company based on employee retention? So could there be financial ramifications, benefits or disadvantages related to finances and a DEI initiative?
I think absolutely. Both ways, a detriment as well as a benefit. Maybe some of the students that are dropping out of school or dropping out for reasons that they're not expressing, and we were a more DEI certified school, some of those drops might stop because maybe they feel like they belong now instead of they don't fit. So I mean, that would be one place I would think of to look is you may have students who are dropping out of school for their typical reason, but that's not the true reason. And if you create a learning environment where they are safe to discuss what their challenges are, you may save that student and they may finish school and have a bright future rather than give up and quit.
Well, and I think the current environment that we're in, the importance of this topic is it could have an impact on, from an employee perspective, whether or not I even want to come work for you, right? So that can have an impact. But it also can have an impact on the student as they move out into jobs. And if it's not made an important awareness for them, I think Laura said something about earlier about them going into an environment and maybe they don't even understand diversity at all, right? And what reality is once they're going to get out there. So I think that it can have all kinds of impacts in a variety of ways. And to her point, we could be losing students for some of those reasons and not realize it.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for answering that. I too have seen some literature that supports that it can affect attrition, student attrition and retention in programs, as well as associates, employee retention. So it's important, right? It's important for many, many reasons, and that's just another reason. Well, here's my last question for the two of you. So our sector has platforms on which to share our story and have a positive impact as it relates to DEI matters. So how do we affect the narrative around that crucial role that our sector plays in changing the lives as it relates to DEI? And this transcends really the type of institution, whether it's for profit, not for profit, public, private, community. What are our arenas? Where can we tell our stories that will have a positive effect for DEI matters?
So we've done a couple things. We've actually completely revamped our recruiting platform to share testimonials around DE&I and stories, things like that. We use a wide range of platforms right now, whether that's Twitter, Pinterest, Facebook, you name it. And, you know, one of the examples that I had is during the past month, for Hispanic Heritage Month, we actually took videos of some of our associates and shared those out on those platforms to be able to just tell stories about, you know, what their experience has been and what, you know, diversity and inclusion means to them. So those are some of the things that we've been trying to do, is just to get some of those messages out there. During Black History Month, our campuses actually reached out and highlighted a African American owned business and highlighted that on our Facebook pages as well, just to bring more awareness to that. So there was actually something shared on one of our town halls that the locally owned smoothie place in Grand Prairie, the guy showed up at the campus and everybody knows him, you know, and they were one of the ones that was, you know, focused on Facebook and Twitter and all that kind of good stuff. And they're like, oh, we saw your story on Twitter. And, you know, they were excited. And it's like, he was just an old friend that came on the campus. So those are some of the things that we've been doing.
Most excellent.
I think in the political environment that this sector is living through right now, positive publicity is becoming more and more important. And what better way than to be the standard bearer of DEI, to be the institutions that stand up and say, we believe in this concept. We believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion are important. And to make sure that that is part of our conversation when we go to Washington, when we have to face all of the regulations and all of the hearings. Maybe this is another piece of that we make sure our voices are heard. And maybe we bring other types of schools along with us, but why not be the standard bearers of DEI, of equity and inclusion for all of our students? And we stand up and wave in a very important flag that people are wanting to see.
Beautifully stated. Thank you both. And I would just add that it's sharing with our colleagues. It's speaking at CSPEN conferences. It's speaking at ACCSC conferences and institutional accreditors and programmatic accreditors. It's putting yourself out there, and it's courageous. It takes courage to do that, but it's a courageous move, and it's a necessary move, especially when you're serving as an advocate or an ally, or just being you and who you are in this space in this time. Do it, and allow us to partner with you if you need some support and you need some suggestions. So I want to thank you both so much for sharing your thoughts. And I am going to now open it up to our attendees. So let me just figure out here how to take you off of mute, attendees. And then we will allow you all to speak. Okay, so I'd like to open it up to the attendees. I believe you all can speak now. I think I need to unmute all attendees. Yes. Okay. So if you have anything you'd like to share, ask, any comments or thoughts, please feel free to do so now.
Hello, everyone. Ms. Plummer, Ms. Robinson, and Ms. Mason. This is Tony Cross with Goodwill Industries of Middle Georgia and the CSRA in the Augusta, Georgia, and Macon area. We service 35 counties of employees, but also we have a college attached to us, which is a very small college, Helms College. Can you all hear me?
We can. Thank you so much.
Very good. We have a very small college just attached to us, Helms College, and I've actually had an opportunity to be with you all on both sessions, which I thought was very informational and very great. And I thank you all for what you all are sharing with myself. This is something we are actually taking a look at, and we are thinking about bringing this on to our campus in regards to helping us with our staff. We have quite a few people, close to 900 employees, and then we have students on top of that too as well at both of our campuses here in the CSRA, which is Augusta, Georgia, and then in the Macon, Georgia area as well. And so with that size of staff, that student base, we're talking close to about 300 students, if you will, in both areas combined. How much time do you think training wise would be? Or what is your average time of training, how long would that commissioner be with us? I think that would be one of the questions I would have for you all at this time.
That's an excellent question. Thank you so much for asking it. I would share that we want to do some assessment. I think we'd want to understand kind of where you're at now. And if you're starting from ground zero, that's awesome, because that means that you get to build and create exactly what you want to see reflected in your program in all of those different buckets that we shared. So it really would be, who do you have available? Have you identified anyone on your campuses that can be kind of the champions and hold regular meetings and I think we go from there. So it's truly an assessment. And most importantly, what is your timeline? Where do you want it to be? How quickly do you want to move? So we would just partner and kind of, one-on-one figure out what works for you and your institution. That's really kind of the starting point. Laura and Tanya, any other thoughts on that?
No, I would agree. And, when we first started, the D&I coordinators that we added at the campus, that just happened, right? So we realized pretty early on that this was not a sprint, it was a marathon that we were running. And we wanted to be very intentional about sustainability and not burning people out. So that's why we, kind of took things in bits and pieces as we moved along, so that we knew that if we put it in place, it became part of our culture. And that way it stayed sustainable after that. So now our weekly meetings that the steering committee has, it's just part of our week, and the subcommittees, it's just part of their every 2 weeks, So I agree with Marlo. It's, just taking a look at, what is your end vision, but realizing that, it has to be a model that's sustainable over time.
Outstanding.
And speaking from a small school perspective, I mentioned this on the last webinar as well. Pick something small and start there. That's what I'm doing. I'm introducing our school to an entirely new concept, something that we in El Paso have never thought of before. So I'm having to take this one step at a time. And I know if I have a question, I too, even though I'm on the panel, I can reach out to the panel and say, hey, what do you guys think? Because that's what we're here for. We're here to bounce ideas off of each other. Marlo told us about their COVID cultural day, and she sent us links to their Facebook so we could see all the different recipes. That was cool. And I mean, it gave me ideas for what I can do in my school as well. So you're not going to be out there alone, because we all know that this is new to some of us, and some of us have been living it our entire lives, but it's okay. The point is, just get started and figure out what makes sense for you and for your school. And coming from a small school myself, we have to take baby steps. That's why I'm thinking maybe our student services person is that right person for me to start educating. I will teach her what I can, and then I will hook her up with somebody else on the panel so that they can teach her even more.
Thank you so much, Laura, and all three of you all. That was spot on. We are a smaller school with a lot of staff as well, with all that. So I can see us taking those small steps. I act as our internal chaplain here, and so I can see why they are kind of coming to me with this, possibly. But there are other persons that I'm thinking about, and I can see connecting all of this to, along with myself, maybe being the POC here. To kind of assist me, or assist us. So thank you all very much for this information.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for weighing in. Any additional comments, thoughts, or questions? We're happy to answer them now. All right, well, the time does not end in terms of being able to ask questions. As Laura's indicated, we are here. Jerry is here. She is the point person. So if you have questions, you'd like to get started, please reach out to Jerry. And she will certainly bring us in as needed. We're also available if you've got questions for us. We are available, and Jerry knows how to reach us and pull us in to make sure that you have all the support that you need. We're so very appreciative of your time, of your interest, of supporting DEI Matters, of being here to listen, learn, contribute, and share. I want to thank you, Laura. I want to thank you, Tanya, for being here and sharing your expertise as well. We are grateful to each and every one of you. And so what I'd like to say is, in addition to having just a spectacular rest of your day, be kind to yourself and be kind to others. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.